My credit card was declined for the third time in 20 minutes, and my husband's phone was going straight to voicemail. I was lying in a bed at Meridian Private Medical Center in Atlanta, 2 days post-surgery for a ruptured gallbladder, my abdomen held together with 16 stitches and a drain tube, and the woman from Patient Financial Services was standing at the foot of my bed holding a tablet, like she was a waitress presenting a check. "Mrs. Sully, I need to be direct with you," she said. Her voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't warm either. It was the voice of someone who had delivered this particular speech too many times. "The insurance claim filed under your policy has come back denied. The insurer says your husband removed you from his employer plan 3 months ago. We have no active coverage in file." 3 months ago, I turned that phrase over in my mind like a stone I'd found in my shoe. 3 months ago was October. 3 months ago, my husband had surprised me with a weekend trip to Savannah, just the two of us. He'd held my hand at dinner and said things were going to get better. I'd believed him. "My husband is handling it," I said. "He stepped out to call the insurance company directly. He'll be back." She looked at me with the particular patience of someone who had heard that sentence before. "I'll give you another 30 minutes, she said. "After that, per our financial policy for self-pay patients without an upfront deposit, we'll need to arrange a transfer to Grady Memorial. They'll be able to continue your care." She left before I could answer. I stared at the ceiling. The room smelled like antiseptic and the particular dry cold of recycled hospital air. My abdomen throbbed with every breath. I called my husband again. Voicemail. I called his office. His assistant, who I'd always been perfectly polite to, told me in a voice that was slightly too careful that he hadn't been in since the morning. The 30 minutes passed, then 40, then an hour. When the financial services woman came back, she came with a discharge coordinator and a very gentle, very firm explanation of what was going to happen next. I wouldn't be thrown out. She was clear about that. The hospital had legal obligations. But my level of care would change. My room would change. My surgeon would hand off to whoever was on at Grady. They were beginning to unhook my IV when the door to my room opened. I expected a nurse. What I got was a man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom. He was in his 60s with white hair cut precisely and a dark gray suit that had never seen a wrinkle. He walked to the center of the room and the financial services coordinator stepped back without quite knowing why. "Excuse me," she started. "This is a patient room, you can't just—" "I've just spoken with your CFO," the man said quietly. "The outstanding balance on this account has been settled, along with a deposit for the next 30 days of inpatient care at whatever level her physicians recommend." He turned to me then, and something shifted in his face. The professional composure cracked, just slightly, at the edges. "Miss, are you Claire Ashworth?" The name hit me like cold water. No one had called me Claire Ashworth in 32 years. That was the name on my original birth certificate. The one the state of Georgia had used when I aged out of foster care. I'd been going by my married name for 6 years. Before that, I was Claire Ashworth. Nobody's daughter, the girl nobody came looking for. "Who are you?" I asked. He pulled a chair to my bedside and sat down with the careful movements of a man who wanted to make himself smaller. He folded his hands in front of him. And he looked at me the way you look at something you thought was lost forever. "My name is Edmund Pierce," he said. "I've been your grandfather's estate attorney for 31 years. I've been looking for you for 26 of them." What followed was the most disorienting 48 hours of my life, and I had spent the previous 48 hours in a post-surgical haze with a drain coming out of my side. Edmund arranged for me to be moved to a private suite on the 4th floor. The difference was so extreme it almost felt cruel, like evidence of everything I hadn't had. Fresh flowers, an actual window, a mattress that didn't make noise when I shifted, a specialist who reviewed my labs within 2 hours and frowned at something on the screen in a way that made my stomach drop. Tell me about your symptoms over the last 6 months, she said. All of them, not just the gallbladder. I told her. The fatigue I'd assumed was work stress, the nausea every morning, the way my urine had started looking wrong, darker than it should be. The neurological episodes my husband had insisted were anxiety. The tingling in my hands, the moments of confusion that came on so suddenly I'd had to grip countertops to stay oriented. He'd made me feel like I was falling apart from the inside, like my body was betraying me the same way everything else in our lives seemed to be fraying. She ordered additional labs. She asked me to describe a typical morning. I told her about the juice. For the past several months, my husband had developed what I'd thought was a sweet habit. Every morning, without fail, he made fresh squeezed orange juice. He'd present it to me with the particular warmth he showed when he wanted me to see him as caring. I drank it every day. I thanked him every day. Her face went very still. The additional labs came back 2 days later. Ethylene glycol. In small repeated doses, it mimics a kidney disorder. The symptoms progress slowly: nausea, fatigue, neurological changes, kidney inflammation. It's nearly tasteless when mixed into something acidic. Without a targeted tox screen, most physicians would never think to look for it. My husband had known exactly what he was doing. He'd planned it carefully, and every morning he had handed me a glass of poison with a smile and waited for me to drink it to the last drop. I didn't cry when the doctor told me. I think I'd already spent all my tears somewhere in that first hospital room, waiting for a phone call that never came. What I felt instead was something that settled into my chest like concrete. Cold, dense, permanent. Edmund came to me that evening and told me everything. My grandfather, Gerald Ashworth, had built the Ashworth Group from a small land development firm in the 1970s into one of the largest privately held real estate companies in the Southeast. He had one daughter, my mother. She died when I was 3 months old from a complication after my birth. Before she died, someone took me from the hospital nursery. During a shift change, someone walked in, picked me up, and walked out. The investigation went nowhere. My grandfather spent years and a significant portion of his personal fortune on private investigators. He died 8 months ago, still searching. He never stopped looking, Edmund said. When consumer DNA databases became common, he submitted a sample and had alerts set on every platform. 3 months ago, a partial match came up through a distant cousin who'd done a recreational ancestry kit. I've been working to confirm the connection ever since. 3 months ago. The same month my husband removed me from his insurance. He knew, I said. Edmund nodded slowly. Your husband had access to your mail, including correspondence from my office, a letter I sent, reaching out carefully about a potential family connection and an estate matter. He paused. He never gave it to you, but he clearly read it. I thought about the Savannah trip, the held hand at dinner. Things are going to get better, said over a candlelit table. He had been celebrating. He had been buying himself time. Under my grandfather's will, the Ashworth Group and its associated assets, real estate holdings across 4 states, investment portfolios, a charitable foundation, passed to his only living heir, me. If no heir was found within a year of his death, the assets would be dissolved into a trust and distributed to institutions. My husband had done the math. If I died before Edmund found me, he could pursue a wrongful death claim against the estate for spousal loss. And the statute allowed for a substantial settlement even without a formal heirship claim, depending on how the will was structured. He hadn't just abandoned me in that hospital. He'd been engineering my death for 6 months, 1 glass of juice at a time, and he'd left me there because he thought the timing was finally right. I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. The city lights spread out in every direction, indifferent and glittering. Edmund, I said, what exactly do I now own? I gave myself 3 weeks to recover, not because Edmund would have let me do otherwise. He was immovably firm on that point, but because I needed the time. Not just to heal physically, but to become someone else. My husband thought I was dead. He'd stopped calling after the first day. I checked because Edmund had my old phone monitored with the help of a forensic specialist his firm retained. My husband had sent 2 texts in the first 24 hours. Both asked about insurance documents. Neither asked how I was. After that, nothing. He was moving on with remarkable efficiency. Edmund showed me the bank records pulled through the probate disclosure process. In the 3 weeks since he'd left me in that hospital, my husband had withdrawn nearly every dollar from our joint checking account. He'd paid first and last month's rent on an apartment in Buckhead. He'd bought a car I'd never seen. He'd taken a woman named Dana, his assistant, the one who'd told me on the phone that he hadn't come in that morning. On a 4-day trip to Charleston using a credit card he'd apparently maintained in his name only the entire time we were married. I thought about what I'd gone without so he could fund his other life. The heating bill I'd paid late. The dentist appointment I kept postponing. The way he'd told me we couldn't afford to go home for the holidays, and I'd believed him because I had no family to go home to, or so I'd thought. In my new private suite with good food and sunlight and a medical team that was quietly horrified by what someone had done to my body, I started to look more like myself. Like a version of myself I hadn't seen in years, actually. Like the person I might have been if I hadn't spent 6 years being slowly told I wasn't worth very much. Edmund brought me a photograph one afternoon, my grandfather taken about 15 years ago at the groundbreaking of a development project. He was smiling. He had my eyes. I held it for a long time. "He would have been so proud of you," Edmund said. "Let's make sure the people who kept us apart understand what they threw away," I said. 3 weeks after I walked out of that hospital suite under my own power, a woman named Victoria Grant walked into my husband's co-working space in downtown Atlanta. Victoria Grant. The name on the business cards Edmund's firm had printed was a real estate investment consultant. She was looking for a local partner for a mixed-use development project in Decatur. Someone entrepreneurial, someone who understood Atlanta's permitting process from the inside. My husband's LinkedIn profile listed him as an expert in exactly that. I wore my hair differently, professional makeup, the kind I'd never had money for before, a suit that cost more than our first month's rent had. I'd practiced a different register. Not an accent, just a tone. Controlled, unhurried, the voice of someone who never needed to raise it to be heard. When he stood to shake my hand, I watched his eyes move over me with the quick, reflexive assessment men like him do automatically. He saw money. He saw someone out of his usual reach. He straightened his tie. He did not see his wife. We sat. He talked. I let him perform his competence for 20 minutes before I introduced the proposal. A joint venture, my capital against his local knowledge, for a site in Decatur. The numbers were real. The site was real. The contract was real. The clause buried in Section 9, subsection C, regarding personal liability in the event of project failure or misrepresentation of credentials, was also very real. He signed without reading past page 3. I watched his hand move across the signature line and thought about every morning I'd woken up and drunk the glass of juice he'd made me. "This is the beginning of something," he said as he slid the pages back across the table. "It really is," I said. I waited 2 weeks. Long enough for him to start spending the good faith deposit I'd wired to the project account. Long enough for Dana to post photos from a restaurant I recognized from the receipt records Edmund's team had pulled. Then I sent the text. From a number he didn't recognize. "Morning juice still tastes like oranges from here. Did you change the brand?" I was watching his location through the monitoring authorization he'd unknowingly signed in the data clause of the contract. A condition his attorney, if he'd had one, would have flagged immediately. The dot on the map stopped moving the moment the message delivered. I sent a follow-up, just an image, a lab report with the words ethylene glycol detected circled in red. The dot didn't move for 4 minutes, then it started moving very fast toward the hospital. He went to the emergency room and demanded records for a patient named Claire Sully. The staff, following Edmund's prior instructions, told him no such patient had been admitted in the past month. No discharge record, no death record. I have the security footage. He stood at the triage desk, and his face went through about 15 different emotions in the space of a minute. He looked like a man whose math had stopped adding up. 2 days later, Edmund's team contacted him as Victoria Grant's office. The project permits had been flagged for a procedural review, and per Section 9 of the contract, the joint venture was in technical default. The personal liability clause was now active. He owed back the deposit, plus the contractual penalty, plus interest, payment due by end of business Friday. He had no money. He'd already spent the deposit. He'd spent the next month's rent on the Buckhead apartment. He'd spent more than he'd had. He was going to lose everything, and he knew it. And somewhere in the back of his mind, his dead wife was texting him lab results. He asked for a meeting with Victoria Grant. I chose the venue, a hotel conference room in Midtown, one I'd reserved through a subsidiary of the Ashworth Group, which now technically owned the hospitality company that managed the property. A small detail, a satisfying one. I arrived early, sat at the head of the table with Edmund to my right and 2 attorneys to my left. When my husband walked in, he was already coming apart. His shirt was wrinkled in a way his shirts never used to be. He'd lost weight. His eyes moved around the room like he was calculating exits. He sat across from me and started talking before I'd said a word. He had a restructuring idea. He could bring in another investor. He just needed more time on the penalty clause, and he could explain the credential discrepancy. There had been a misunderstanding. I know about the ethylene glycol, I said. He stopped. I watched the color leave his face the way water drains from a glass, slowly, then all at once. The toxicology report has already been filed with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, I continued. Along with the financial records showing the fraudulent insurance cancellation, the joint account withdrawals, and the communications between you and Dana about your timeline. I paused. The medical documentation establishes approximately 6 months of cumulative dosing. In Georgia, that's attempted murder in the first degree. Your attorney, whoever you can afford at this point, can walk you through the sentencing guidelines. He looked at Edmund. He looked at the 2 attorneys. He looked back at me. And then, for the first time, he actually looked at me. Something resolved in his face, the way a shape clarifies when your eyes finally adjust to the dark. Claire, he said, not a question, a reckoning. The woman you left in that hospital bed, I said, has been legally recognized as the sole heir to the Ashworth Group, which, as of last week, includes the holding company that owns your co-working space, the building where your Buckhead apartment is, and the development site you signed a contract on. I let that settle for a moment. You've been paying rent to my grandfather's estate for 3 weeks without knowing it. He didn't move. I don't think he was capable of moving. There are 2 detectives from the Atlanta Police Department in the hallway, Edmund said quietly, along with a forensic accountant who will be accompanying them to image your devices. My husband looked at the door. He looked back at me. There was a moment, I want to be honest about this, where I thought he might cry, and I felt something tighten in my chest. Not forgiveness, not softness. Just the plain recognition that I had once loved this person, or believed I had, and that grief doesn't dissolve just because it's been replaced by something harder. You made me feel like I was nothing, I said. For 6 years you made me believe I was lucky you'd chosen me, that whatever was wrong with my body was some kind of flaw I'd been born with. You handed me poison every single morning and watched me thank you for it. He opened his mouth. Don't, I said. Whatever you were going to say, don't. I nodded to Edmund. He opened the door. Dana was taken into custody separately at the Buckhead apartment on charges of conspiracy and wire fraud. She hadn't known about the poisoning. The DA's office believed that, and I believed it too, for whatever it's worth. It didn't make her innocent of the rest, but it made her cooperative, and her cooperation helped the case considerably. My husband is awaiting trial. I don't spend much time thinking about the timeline. The outcome is what it is. The Ashworth Group's board held its first meeting with me in attendance 6 weeks after Edmund found me in that hospital room. I sat at the head of a table my grandfather had sat at for 30 years. The people around it were careful with me at first, watchful, measuring. People who have spent decades managing significant assets tend to be cautious about the people who inherit them. I understand that. I was careful too. I've redirected a significant portion of the Ashworth Foundation's giving toward programs that support foster youth aging out of the Georgia system. I know what that transition looks like from the inside. I know what it needs and what it almost never gets. It feels like the most honest thing I can do with what I've been given. I visit my grandfather's grave when I'm in Savannah. Edmund told me he liked yellow tulips, which surprised me. From every photograph, he seemed like such a serious man. I stand there for a few minutes and I talk to him, which is something I never imagined doing because I spent 32 years believing I had no one to talk to. I tell him about the company, about the deals we've closed, the ones we're watching, the foundation, the work ahead. I don't tell him about the anger because I think he would understand it without being told, and I don't want to spend the time I have at that grave rehearsing things that are already finished. What I tell him every time is this: I'm here. It took longer than it should have, and there are people who will answer for that, but I found my way back. He spent 26 years looking for me. The least I can do is show up.